Welcome, everybody, to Season 2 of the Selling Fort Collins podcast. I am here with two of the favorite guests from Season 1, Mayor Jeni Arndt, and the President and CEO of the Fort Collins Chamber of Commerce, Ann Hutchison. Welcome, both of you.
Thank you.
We're honored.
Pleased to be back.
Yes.
And especially together.
Yeah, this is going to
fun.
be fun. This is the first episode that we've done with two guests at the same time, and I couldn't think of two people that would be better to sit down with. And, for those of you that are tuning in for the first time, if you go back to Season 1, you'll get the full introductions and a lot of things we covered there. So this is really meant to build off of that. I think there's some follow-up questions. There are some areas where I'd like to go a little bit deeper. We're going to do that today. So a little more structure today, but also it's going to be conversational, and just want people to continue to get to know you both, because as we discussed just a minute ago before we started rolling, you are two of the most authentic, positive, energetic people that I know, and bring something special to the community of Fort Collins, and grateful to have you, honestly. So let's get into it. One thing you mentioned, Jeni, in passing the last show was that your dad was the president of the Chamber of Commerce.
Yeah, he was. I forget the exact years. I think it was like 68 to 69 or something. And then Kevin Jones, who works at the Chamber, has been really wonderful about digging up some of those archives for me and my family and sharing them. But one of my favorite pictures is when he was out opening up the new Hughes Stadium, controversially way out of town at the time, moved from in town to out of town. So when the stadium kind of came back up, I took that picture, made a copy, and I sent it to Tony Frank, and I said, say everything's going to be okay. These things come and they go and they come back.
Right. It was the same thing all over again when they decided to move the stadium from off campus back on campus. And,
correct.
And that's the football stadium. For those of you who are listening who might not know, Hughes Stadium used to be on the west side of town, a little bit of a drive out there. Now we have this beautiful, brand new, relatively brand new, state-of-the-art on-campus football stadium. So I'm curious, what kind of things were discussed around the dinner table in the late 60s, early 70s? I thought that might be interesting for Ann to hear too, because she's the president today. What were the issues in Fort Collins, the initiatives at that time?
Yeah, so the dinner table conversation in my family was business, 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 and business.
Okay.
And I'm the youngest of four, and all three of my siblings went into business. With big business,
by the way. Big Titans of industry would be the appropriate moniker for her family.
So CenturyLink, McDonald's, and Disney. Big companies, large corporations.
Wow.
And then, as I say, I think my parents got tired, looked to the left or looked to the right. I don't know where. They looked away, and I snuck off to the Peace Corps. So I was the one that got away. But it was always business, and it was always about what I love about our current chamber's community, building community tagline is, it wasn't just business, it was how do you build a community? And our across the street neighbor was Gene Mitchell, who's credited with the father of Old Town. Our side neighbor was a county commissioner. I don't know what it was about that little Crestmore place, little court in there, but the focus was on business and building community both. So, and then Gene Mitchell, not only was he a business person, but he also was chair of the school board for a long time. So these sort of civic conversations were what we focused on. And interest rates, time value of money, but, all the business stuff.
And I'll say, Greg, that's why Jeni is an amazing mayor, is that she brings this incredible depth of understanding and awareness that, and we've had lovely mayors in the past, but I just think that actual growing up around a dinner table, talking about community, talking about business, seeing the connection just has made her an amazingly thoughtful leader for us in Fort Collins. And I feel very fortunate that I get to work with her on an almost daily basis, because she gets it from the business perspective. And that's incredibly valuable.
Yeah. And when did you two first meet?
So Jeni will have to give the actual date, but she was contemplating a run for the state house, and her husband and I were serving on the economic advisory board. It had a weird name at the time. Anyway, at the city of Fort Collins, we were serving together, and Channing said, Anne, you need to meet my wife. And he also said to Jeni, you need to meet Anne. So the three of us went to lunch downtown. The restaurant's not even there anymore. It's now rare. But at the time, it was a good lunch spot, and got the chance to hear Jeni's background, to begin to see what she had to offer as a state representative. It was just one of those super fun, oh my gosh, this is an amazing human being kinds of moments where you say, on the surface, it looks like we wouldn't be in alignment around the universe. And then it turns out that we actually are almost probably 95% of the time in alignment of our worldview and our community view. So yeah, it was a fun moment for sure.
No, that's neat. I mean, you two became friends, it seems.
Yeah, I would agree. Almost immediately, my husband said, there's this one person who serves with me on this committee. We really need to meet her. And it was probably 2013. I was still just kind of thinking about it. But I remember I had the same feeling. I was like, okay. And now she's president of the chamber, which is, I'm very pleased.
Oh, thank you.
That's neat. One thing I've observed about both of you is I think you have just a lot of friendships, a lot of relationships. It's just a deep network in Fort Collins, clearly, but also like real, genuine friendships. Jeni, I don't know if you know this, but I helped JJ and Saul sell their home on Valley View Road. That was me. And so I got to hear a lot about you, and that's a real friend. I mean, you two are great friends. Following your social media, and I mean, what day of the week is it? It's a concert, it's a CSU volleyball game, it's a basketball game, and you're surrounded by your friends. I mean, you two have these amazing networks of deep, authentic friendships. I work with so many people who are moving to town from all over the country, and one thing I want to help them with and guide them with, and I think people listening are just curious, like, how do you get linked in? How do you form those friendships in Fort Collins? Is there a secret there? Is there any advice you would have to somebody that says, hey, I'm kind of looking to get linked in here and to build a network of really great friends like you two have? What advice would you give them?
Well, I have a recent and red hot story, and I think it exemplifies where you can find community in Fort Collins, really following any passion you have. So obviously, if you're a runner, Fort Collins Running Club, those sorts of things. But today I heard from our city manager, and probably not want to speak in specifics yet because it was an individual gift to the city. But based on one person's passion of a lifelong commitment to a certain activity in Fort Collins, and has, was that committed to that activity that she participated with through the city. I'm not being evasive. I just want to protect her privacy if she wants me to. And that's where she found community. And it can be through the arts. It can be through sports. It could be through, and plus in Fort Collins, we're kind of a little bit crazy, right? We're a little unique. So you're going to be able to find really, I think, pretty much any sort of unique. And I would say, within those groups, those relationships flourish.
Yeah.
And if people are looking for an easy button, it's show up. Period. Full stop. If you show up, you're going to run into someone who has the same passion you do, that also is there because they're passionate, but they also want to get to know others that are going to carry the same passion. And so show up, whether it's a basketball game and you just talk to the person who's sitting next to you and suddenly you're both screaming your lungs out, hoping that the Rams score, or it's at City Hall. I'm always fascinated by city council meetings and looking at the audience that will show up. Yes, we do have audiences that show up to watch city council in person and online, but in person, and it's this just fascinating mix of people that are passionate about their community. And we definitely have Fort Collins nice going on, where you can say hello and somebody will say hello back, and you can start a conversation. And more often than not end up walking out of a space, having a new connection, having a phone number, having somebody that you can see on the street. Yeah, it's pretty special here in Fort Collins.
I love that. I've experienced that firsthand.
Yeah.
And I like one thing you said in there too, Jeni. We're a little bit crazy here. A little bit crazy. Like there's this.
Some for you.
We have fans that watch city council. We're more than just a little crazy.
Well,
no offense, Jeni.
None taken.
And maybe in a business sense too. It's such an entrepreneurial place. One thing you mentioned during our first conversation was you were at a restaurant with a friend, and you just off the cuff asked the server,
right?
Hey, do you do anything outside of this? And she said, "Yeah, I make organic dog food."
Yeah, because my friend was saying, I don't know what you mean by everyone has a side hustle. I go, well, let's just use this next person as an example. Do you have a, and she goes, yeah, I make organic dog food. I said, see, I told you, pretty much anyone you run into will be like, well, actually, I, whatever. It's cool.
There's this
cool.
entrepreneurial undercurrent here that is, it's almost hard to explain, but that exemplifies it perfectly. Your server is also making organic dog food, and people are having conversations about business, about something that's a side hustle, about a business they're launching. That's a common thread of conversation here. And it's an entrepreneurial city. That's another thing that we spoke about, Jeni, during our episode in season 1. It is a city that is willing to fail, willing to take chances. And I think I just have seen that play out. And I was wondering, question really for both of you, what's one thing that the city has tried, maybe one thing the chamber has tried that, maybe hasn't gone well? And then what's something that has gone well? Like give me an example of a swing and a hit, maybe a swing and a miss. Do any come to mind?
Yeah, I mean, sometimes, things don't go right very well at the beginning because they're new or different, right?
Sure.
We're implementing the single hauler trash, right? And, but of 186,000 residents, and I'm not sure how many households within there, there's problems with a couple hundred.
What is single hauler trash, just for everyone who's listening?
Oh, okay. So that used to be quite controversial, and they tried it several years ago and it failed.
So in Fort Collins, until September, you could pick your own hauler to pick up your trash at your home. Exactly. And at one point in Fort Collins, we had a number of very local, family-owned hauling companies. And so it was a pretty sacred cow of, well, we don't want that family to lose their industry, so we're going to keep allowing everybody to just pick up the phone, call a company, and they'll come pick up your trash. The city, in their analysis, continued to see that there was opportunity for us to decrease wear and tear on our roads, decrease the number of trucks that are running if we could narrow into a single hauler for residents. And many of those family-owned businesses have gone away. So I think it became easier to say yes to, we're just going to pick one winner, when it was just corporate mean guys left.
Okay.
Once Republic bought out Gallegos.
Exactly.
Yeah, so the city made a contract, I believe it's a 5-year contract with Republic.
Okay.
And became a single hauler. So you don't have these trucks chasing each other around the neighborhoods constantly. And you're right, it's just residential. This is an example of something that wasn't approved last time, was approved this time. And, we're going to be honest, like it's not a perfect transition, right? So we're working through those families and those residences that are now. So there's that. And then, there's some things that we're out their usefulness. We have budgeting for outcomes is the way that we do our internal city budget. It's about $930 million, give or take, including intergovernmental transfers for those of you who are paying attention. And we all kind of agreed that this might probably be the last year of that exact style of developing our biannual budget. So some things run their course and some things you try and don't work. But that's the nature of public policy. How about you, Anne?
Yeah. Well, I was reflecting on Fort Zed. So City of Fort Collins has long had very much an environmentally focused, environmental forward view of the world. And again, I think that's what makes Fort Collins incredibly special. But roll the tape back about 15 years ago, and the city of Fort Collins, along with a number of other partners, business included, was able to secure a grant from the federal government that was to provide dollars to see if you could actually create a district in Fort Collins that was a zero energy district. That's what the Z stands for, zero energy district. So big math problem. And city took the opportunity to not just make it a math problem, but an opportunity for everyone to join in. And if you recycle, it counts for these number of points that helps us achieve our zero energy district. And if you turn off your lights, if you name the effort to save the environment, and it was on the checklist. Well, it turns out that I believe that kickstarted a lot of additional momentum. They were able to prove out the math problem. But what was super fascinating about the math problem is that the solution relied on ginormous diesel-powered generators, because if you turned off all of the system of electricity, could you still function as a district? And so again, the math problem said, oh yeah, we just have to set up all of these diesel-powered generators, which of course is in direct conflict with the entire concept of let's save the world. So
an unintended consequence.
Exactly. So right idea, right concept, generated all this amazing community support. Don't pay attention to the final math. And at the same time, I think that was this beautiful launching pad for so many other environmentally focused entrepreneurial solutions that we have that are growing right here in Fort Collins. We don't have the powerhouse and the leadership that Brian Wilson at Colorado State provides without a little Fort Z happening on the side. We don't have Powerhouse 2 again, right? I mean, it's this expanded vision that Dr. Wilson has for we can research the biggest environmental challenges of the world right here in Fort Collins alongside industry and create solutions. Again, I don't know that the momentum that those programs have is in place, but for a little bit of a hiccup with Fort Z.
Right. It spins off into other things. Speaking of the climate topic, I know, Jeni, you were one of 10 mayors, I believe, to attend the Global Summit in Dubai, the Global Climate Summit. That was last year?
Yeah, the COP, the Conference of the Parties. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So there were, there were about 80 mayors globally.
Okay.
I think the number 10 maybe you're getting is 9. I serve on the Global Executive Committee for Climate-Wise Cities that's called ICLE. So, so those are a little separate, but I was there as part of a mayor's group and additionally with ICLE, yeah.
And what are some things when you go to these conferences in Dubai, we're spinning off these things, like clearly they want to learn some things from us. That's why we're invited. And you're very charming. There's, but they are curious about Fort Collins, and you're a very good advocate for this. They want to learn some things from us. I would imagine we're learning some things from them too. What are some examples of things that we've maybe learned from them and things that they might have been interested to hear from us about what we're doing here?
Yeah, it's fascinating. So those are obviously there were 100,000 people at the meeting. So it's quite large, but it is also an expo where, all the most amazing surrounding of the, at a normal conference, you'd call them vendors. That's something that big. I don't know what you call them. So there's the blue zone, the green zone that goes out like that. So the blue zone is where the invitees are happening. And then within the blue zone is where the negotiations are actually happening for those international agreements, right? So obviously I'm not an international negotiator. All that. That's our federal government. These are the federal governments coming together talking. But on the next ring in the blue zone were people like us talking about climate finance. We're talking about when we're transitioning to this clean, what's the finance mechanism for this enormous capital injection, right? And then also how is the global South going to respond to that? That's the financing piece. So when you really get together and look globally at this issue, it looks a lot different from the piece that we're doing here in Fort Collins. But as you mentioned, the piece that we're working on here in Fort Collins, and I would say regionally now as well, informs the global for like concrete examples, right? So people are always interested in our climate future plan. They're interested that our foreparents buried the power lines, right? For what we're doing on Platte River Power Authority, PRPA, that's Platte River Power Authority. That's the generation, the electric generation for the 4 cities, came together 51 years ago to say, hey, why does everyone have their own generation facility? Let's do one. That's how we got Rawhide 1. That's the coal plant. And until recently, the 4 cities have been generated by coal, just like everybody else. In 2018, there was an aggressive goal set to be 100% clean energy generation by 2030. That entails closing down the coal plant. And since they made that, the state has then kind of followed as all the coal plants in Colorado will be shut down by 2030. So the question here now for our generation is, we do wind and solar, obviously, but where do we get our dispatchable energy from? The stuff you can do on demand, right? Batteries are great. We have an RFP out for batteries, but we haven't solved the last 10%. So people are always interested in that. Like, how do you have a public power authority? A lot of people have private sector, right? Even in Europe and other places around the world, they're like, well, we have public power? You guys own your own? I'm like, yeah, it's great. You should try it, right? So they're curious about that. They're curious about our local initiatives. They're curious how you bring the community along. I said, we have never had to worry about that here. The community, it brings the government along, right? And I said, once it gets in your DNA, I'm curious about my colleagues, especially other colleagues in the United States who've moved faster on densification of their zoning code, which we've had a hard time doing here for various reasons. So things like that are really good information sharing. And then you let the federal government work at that level with the bigger pieces on the accords and so on and so forth. And that's basically what we talk about there.
And I'll throw in that we are incredibly fortunate to have the leader that Jeni is in that position to be able to tell our story. Fort Collins is on everybody's list of, man, they're doing it right there. Let's bring that mayor and talk about it. And she's this amazing envoy that showcases us, shares that message. And at the same time, I really appreciate the fact that she's constantly looking for that nugget to bring back to inspire us locally. We worked together last year on an effort around the idea of a people's meeting. Can you create a place and a space for average citizens to come together, get kind of nerdy around some topics, and just learn from each other in order to have civil discourse, but also to think differently about how we govern ourselves. Thanks to Jeni being on the ground, being able to see, taste, feel it, brought that idea back, rallied a couple of us around the table, and we did our first people's meeting a summer ago. So it's been almost 18 months ago, and so much fun, right? I mean, just to take an example that she was able to see nationally or internationally and test it here. We're just really lucky to have her style of leadership open the door for us to try out those kinds of fun things.
Yeah, just to take these best practices from other places is interesting. I think it's interesting to tie in the land use code conversation with this too, because you kind of alluded to that, Jeni, and I think other places going a little bit faster. And I know you've had some meetings and hosted some things, Ann, with the chamber to get some feedback from the community on the land use code. I'm curious, what kind of feedback have you gotten on where the land use code is at now? And then we can talk a little bit about what you two would like to see going forward.
Yeah, well, it was a really big lift by our city council to finally get residential code updated. we were really big fans of the very first code that came out because it did have that opportunity for densification. It had that opportunity for us to really look at neighborhoods in a different way moving forward as a community, especially when you consider we have a hard boundary. To the west, we have mountains that set that hard boundary. To the east, we've drawn lines in the sand to say this is going to be Fort Collins and that's it. So we were big fans of the very first shot. Council was fully on board. We had some citizens that didn't like that answer, so we went back to the drawing board. Really liked our second effort. Again, council fully on board, said yes. Still had some citizens that felt a little uncomfortable. So we took a third shot at it and were able to get over the finish line, what we now all call a foundational update to our code for residential areas. What's happening now is taking a look at the commercial corridors and really thinking about how do we use spaces that aren't for houses for the future. And I'm excited that a lot of the conversations I have been in center around let's bring some housing in there. Let's bring in some super dense housing into these commercial corridors. Can we create places for people to live, work, and play all within 15 minutes of where they live? Council has then has reinforced that and made that a priority of let's investigate how we create 15-minute cities within our boundaries where, again, you can live in maybe a 10-story building with hundreds of your friends, and then you come down to the basement and you have coffee with another 100 friends, and then you walk across the street to your job or to the transit line that takes you to your job. That's a whole new way of thinking for Fort Collins, and I'm energized by the conversations I'm in where people continue to say, yeah, let's think about this. Let's get big. I'm quite certain by the time we get all the way through this conversation, we'll have some folks that maybe won't be as comfortable, but I'm very hopeful for this upcoming 12-month conversation.
Well, that's fascinating because it seems like there was the first try at the land use code, the second try, then the third try was third time's a charm.
Third time's a charm.
Like that passed, but people were pushing back on some of these density initiatives. But now it sounds like the feedback is, okay, in these commercial corridors, these commercial segments, yeah, more open to more residential density, more open to this live, work, play scenario. There was just some pushback. Seemingly everyone thought that their neighbor was going to convert their home into a duplex or triplex with an accessory dwelling unit in the back.
Or a 6-story building, and you wouldn't know until the bulldozer showed up. That was always the narrative that I found to be quite fascinating. Yeah.
I found that to be fascinating too, just from having a construction background and being in real estate and hearing the narrative that, the investors are going to come in and they're going to turn into a triplex, and the cost of construction of this is simply not feasible. It's not doable. I think the majority of people would like to see an ADU, who would like to see an ADU, an accessory dwelling unit. A lot of time is for mom and dad to come visit to help babysit the 4 and 7-year-old, or it might be a sick parent that they'd like to care for. There are all these other circumstances that are out there in our reasons for an ADU. And I think there were reasonable restrictions put on some of the swings, some of the attempts to get it passed.
So what did happen in the end too is the state came in and made laws. So we do have ADUs now in Fort Collins, but that was through a controversial, to some local governments call it state preemption, but that always kind of makes me smile because, of course, the state preempts the locals and the federal preempts the state. That's how it works. So everybody goes, state preemption. I'm like, almost every bill they do is state. Anyway, so they did come in. They lifted U+2. We were going to do a more moderate approach because it's kind of the third rail here. We were probably going to go up to 4 or 5. We're in negotiation, and the state said, no, there's no restriction on occupancy now.
Yeah, as of this past summer, right?
Yeah.
Yep, except for health and safety.
Okay,
which is fair.
And we should define U+2. So in Fort Collins, we had legislation passed in the 60s, which is really crazy, that in our city that said you can only have this number of people that are unrelated living in a single home together. It actually laid pretty fallow for a very, very long time. And then in the early 2000s, government and community got really worked up about it and started to kind of put the hammer down on, well, all of our world problems would be solved if we just used our occupancy limitations and stop letting so many people live together in a single place. And so, as Jeni said, that was a bit of a third rail for us for about 20 years. Fortunately, we've been able to elevate some of these housing issues that in so many minds were incredibly local, but were actually housing crisis issues across the state. And the state was able to say, you know what? ADU should be a use by right across the state of Colorado. Fort Collins, sorry that you couldn't figure it out, but guess what? We're going to do this across the state. Same thing for occupancy. The state has said, you know what, this is an issue that is of statewide concern. Here's the new answer. Let's go. And I think we're better for it. I really do. I think we're going to see more people in more housing solutions that meet the budget that they have, and allow them to be true community members, not commuters, not living with, in bedroom communities or living without accommodation. So I'm excited for what we've been able to get through past over the last year, and especially with that statewide perspective.
A really big year, right? In 2024, I've been doing real estate here since 2006 when that's when the U+2, no more than 3 unrelated, it really, we all had to start having those disclosures signed. We did a real estate transaction, and what a big year. So the U+2 rule, the no more than 3 unrelated, is gone. It kind of just went away this past summer. And if you want to construct an accessory dwelling unit in your backyard, you can. And that was all
with some restrictions,
with some restrictions. Let's
we want to make sure people know that the city can still do sort of form but one thing, every year we go on something called the trade mission, and Ann and I get to participate. I'm always like, where's the ambassador to sign the accord? I don't know why we call it a mission, but we do. Yeah. That's what it's called. We didn't name it.
We just go.
But this year we were in North Carolina.
Yeah, Raleigh, right?
I'm really pushing this idea.
Yes.
And we heard it together, which is they had a contest, ADU design contest. And the top winners, 3 or 5, 3, are pre-permitted. So if you choose A, B, or C of an ADU, you don't have to permit it. There's the architecture.
It's an off-the-shelf permit where you say, oh, I'm building number 2. They give you your permit, and your contractor can go to work tomorrow.
Wow.
So cool.
Isn't Fort Collins a great place? Because we have the community college, we have talented high school students, we have obviously talented CSU students and construction management. We also have a lot of talented architects. Yeah. I'm picturing this really, I don't know, I'm advocating for this at the city. I don't always get my way, and that's fine. But it certainly is a compelling idea because someone like me who has a backyard probably big enough for an ADU, I simply don't have the time to sit with an architect or the desire. I'm terrible with interior decor. I don't do any of that. I don't know none of it. But if I had an option to say A, B, or C, and to your point, my mother's now 88, and she doesn't live far from me, but she still lives independently, but won't be able to for very long.
Mm-hmm.
And wouldn't it be lovely if she could be close and independent, but very, to your point.
And just clarity too. Like, for example, I love the A, B, C, and that's what they're doing in Raleigh. That's what they're doing there. I mean, if we did something like that, like say that is, to your point, Jeni, subject to some restrictions. However, if you could say, look, if you have a minimum lot width of this, a minimum, depth of this, so you can look that up online. You can see that on the GIS map. So you can find that out, and then, hey, this is the size of my lot. This is the width I have to work with. I can choose the A or the B. It looks like I can't choose the C. I'm not quite wide enough, but I can choose the A or the B. That clarity out there and being able to get a permit quickly and just go.
Yes. And I think the reality is ADUs are not going to be an affordable solution for a lot of people. And we also know that certainty and regular outcomes that you can expect are one of the levers that we can use to reduce the cost of housing. If you know for sure that it's going to take a month for you to make it through the process, you then know how much time, you have to have that extra money available in order to make it happen. Clarity and certainty are absolutely key, I think, for us as a community as we look at all of our processes, whether it has to do with ADUs or it has to do with anything else that government gets the opportunity to say yes or no to. If we can narrow the focus on that time in process, I think we all win across the community. We all win.
And have open forums, hear people's concerns.
Yeah.
One concern off the cuff was, people are going to make these ADUs short-term rentals. That was actually a fair concern, I thought. But yeah, they just say, you can't use them for short-term rentals.
Correct. Owner occupied.
Yeah, you have to be owner occupied. Pretty easy response.
Pretty easy fix to that response.
Yeah. And the city listened and did these things. So I'm excited to see where that goes. Let's talk about some stats. I know the housing affordability thing is a real pressing issue here, and I feel like we're taking steps in the right direction. I'm also excited about the cool properties that I'm seeing out there. I'm excited about the $1 million+, the $2 million+, the interesting people that are coming to our community to live in these homes. A few stats. The past 5 years, we've seen 500%, a little over 500% increase in the number of sales in the $1 million+ price range in Fort Collins, which is fascinating. Even more fascinating to me is the $2 million+ price range in Fort Collins. If you look at the 12 months ending November 2023, 12 sales. And if you start looking at 12 months prior to that, it's like 0. So
is that because home values have gone up so much? I mean, that has to, there weren't that many $2 million+ homes before, but part of that has to be the value of the home.
Part of it, a big part of that is just appreciation of rare properties and out-of-state buyers coming in, and they want the house on the lake with the mountain views or the Old Town location, certainly the appreciation of it. What's fascinating is just the number, 12. And then if you look at this up, the 12 sales, that was the 12 months ending November 2023. And then if you look at the 12 months ending November 2024, more recently, this is where it gets especially fascinating, 27 sales. So an increase of 225% in 1 year. I last week sold the most expensive home to sell in the city limits of Fort Collins in history that I'm aware of. Not the most expensive home with a Fort Collins address. There was one, in the county that sold higher, but this sold at $3.95 million. It's a little over 6,000 square foot residence on just over 3 acres with water rights and very in Fort Collins city limits. And the owner is someone who owns a home in Austin, Texas, who also owns a home in Big Sky, Montana.
Yeah. Oh.
So if you look at these $2 million+ sales, it's fascinating that it is oftentimes a high percentage. It's a second or a third home. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So for me, my curiosity spins around, yes, second homes. I'm hearing that out in the market as well. It's a lot of times people that, I used the phrase titans of industry earlier, titans of industry that have made their successful life somewhere else, have identified Fort Collins for its incredible quality of life. The fact that CSU is right there in the center of our community, and look at our downtown, you name the amenity, and people are putting a dot on the map and saying, well, if I'm going to have a second home, I'm going to have it right there. So I'm curious to see what kind of energy those kinds of entrepreneurs bring to our community, even as a second home, maybe not their primary home with a business coming along, but man, I want to harvest all of that brain power for sure. The second thing that strikes me, though, I've done a couple of presentations here in the last week where I've had to remind people that we're growing older as a city and we're growing older as a state. As little as 10 years ago, our average age for the 2-county region was 29 years old. Today, it's almost 36. So this is a phenomenon, again, that's happening across the state of Colorado, where people we used to be a state where people would come very young, have their families, and then they would retire somewhere else. They're choosing not to retire somewhere else, and we are aging in place. So as a state, we're getting older. As a city, we're really getting older. And so I think a little bit of that larger investment sale is olderness getting older, and therefore you have more wherewithal and you can move up to that next big thing.
It must have sort of a spiral effect too, because the more expensive you become, the more attractive you are to only people who wealth can be associated with age, right?
Yeah.
People are saying, oh, we're getting some high school students moving in, but young professionals with little kids aren't moving here.
Yeah.
And I'm curious to hear what you have to say about who's moving out, or what's the profile. Or would you be able to comment on that?
No, I absolutely could. I think, I look at the two largest sales of the past 6 months. This one at 3.95, then another one over $2 million in Old Town, and both were estate situations where nobody moved. Unfortunately,
I see. Yeah,
they passed.
Yeah,
and
again, that transfer of wealth, right?
That goes right over the conversation
we're seeing across the country, right?
Yeah.
The biggest transfer of wealth because people are aging out and...
Yeah.
Interesting.
I am not seeing people decide to move from Fort Collins. I'm not seeing when there's really that decision. Now, there are situations where jobs take them. What I'm not seeing is what I would imagine you see, and I'm not hearing is what I would imagine is pretty commonplace around the country. With this, we're just ready for something else. We're just ready to, I'm not coming across a situation where that's the case. I think people who live here just seem to love living here. And I ask so many questions.
That's great.
I might be a little bit nosy when I'm who.
I think you're a sociologist. You're interested in people.
Right.
Yeah, maybe. I'm very curious. And so even when I'm not representing the buyer, I'm asking these questions like, and that's how I find this person they have a house in Austin in a Big Sky, and this is their third property. And, then the night, well, why Fort Collins? And, there's a lot of times there is people are having kids later in life, and you might guess that they had kids that were much older, but it turns out they have kids who are going to CSU, which so many things come back to CSU, by the way, in these conversations. And it's the energy there. There's a lot, but it's attracting a really impressive.
It's our largest employer by
far, and it's attracting just a very impressive student body there with these new programs, and a lot of people locally here are involved in that too. So, CSU. The other thing I'm hearing is these are retired people who are very healthy. And you're an hour away from Denver, so you can get the city, but these are people that are, they're going hiking, they're going biking. A lot of them are doing CrossFit, and they're in their 60s or even early 70s.
You know how hard it is to win your age group anymore? It's ridiculous. I'll finish like fifth. I'm like, who are the other women in my age group? I'm like, who's she? Not that I'm competitive. I just need to know.
Clearly.
Who's that? Where'd they come from? It's really remarkable.
Yeah.
And if you all joking aside, but if you watch the times of the, 40 plus, they still call that masters, which makes me laugh. I think you need to work on that running community. The times for those age categories, if you do 10-year chunks, are just unbelievable. They're coming down like crazy, I'm just like, all joking aside.
Yeah.
That's awesome.
This is a place, a city that is full of very fit people who are getting outside and doing these things. And that's exciting to see. I think, the direction it's going, like the direction with these expensive sales, the direction with the affordability, I think the conversation is going to keep happening. We spoke last time we had the podcast in season 1, Ann, about, the comps. So where are we going and what city are we going to be next? And you brought up a few really interesting ones that I hadn't thought of. And maybe the most interesting one was Minneapolis. But, when you take a trip like you just took to Raleigh, do you have any more thoughts on that, and kind of where we're trending and where we're going? Any other comps in addition to that? Minneapolis? Did they jump out at you, or either of you?
Well, again, we were on this economic mission trip to Raleigh, and there's no doubt that there is a lot of similarity. Now, North Carolina has a handful of magic tricks that they've put into their vision for their community or for their state that I don't know that we'd be able to swing for the fence and do, like putting into their constitution an actual dedication of funding to their higher ed system. And because of that, they can limit the number of out-of-state students that come to their universities. I think they were telling us that North Carolina State was limiting their out-of-state participants to 17% on their campus. We're on a track here in Fort Collins with Colorado State to be the actual inverse of that in order to pay for our university because of the lack of state support. So again, a couple of magic tricks where I'd really love to replicate those here, because I think creating pathways that build up and you begin to grow your own talented people that stay because they can is something. It is a nut that is really big and hard for us to crack here in Colorado based on our funding pathways. But we all walked away from that trip to Raleigh saying, oh, yeah, they are very much like us, and there's some things we can learn and do. We actually had a conversation as we were leaving the experience talking about where do we go next. And some of the conversations were around we need to stop going to cities that have an international airport or a major airport hub and actually go to one that's an hour away from an airport hub. So places like Lincoln have been on the list. Is there something we can learn from a region like that, where Lincoln's an hour from Omaha? What's that dynamic look like? I think Omaha is a very interesting community, very interesting region that we could learn from. Yeah. Milwaukee has been on the list a couple of times. They have an incredible entrepreneurial space relative to water that could have a lot of could be very applicable to us here in Colorado. It's fun to just dream about where else could we go to really pick and choose and grab the best ideas.
Right. Well, you brought up airport. Let's talk about the airport for a minute.
Because let's talk about the airport.
I pulled up the article just a few days ago, and I saw you, Jeni, with the scissors cutting the blue ribbon just right there, front and center. I dream about lunchtime, in future years when, maybe the kids are grown and my wife, Sarah, and I have a little bit more time, but just deciding over lunch that I'd like to be in Scottsdale or Palm Springs for happy hour and just roll down to the northern Colorado airport.
I like your dreaming.
And we have the terminal now, a $22 million terminal, about 20,000 square feet. It's beautiful. A lot of people got to see it just recently here at the open house. They expected a few hundred. They got 3,000.
I expected 30.
You expected 30. So you were really setting the bar low.
They're like, will you come and cut the ribbon at the new terminal? I'm like, sure. I drive down there, I go, why am I parking in Windsor? I walk off. I was like, what's happening here? That was such a great event. I want to give out tons of credit to, I call it FNL. Those are our call letters. It's part of the way I have fun with that. But instead of Northern Colorado Regional, FNL. And they're starting to brand it FNL too. Like they're like, oh yeah, this is fun. But
what does the FNL stand for? Like what is it?
You know how every airport has their call numbers?
Oh, okay.
Like Denver is DEN, and then there's DIA.
Well, and FNL would be Fort Collins and Loveland.
Sure.
From back in the day.
Got it.
So I'm all a big FNL calling it fan.
Okay,
I think
I can get on board with that.
FNL. So, you fly into FNL. People are like, where's FNL? You're like, it was, I just want to give a lot of kudos to the airport staff and to, they also hired a company to help push that out. And they did a wonderful job as evidenced by all the people there. And then all the contractors, everybody came. There was like Tesco did a little open bar. We had music. It was lovely. So you look at how many people are interested in that airport. So we've had some airport demand studies. We also know that some things are happening in Greeley. In terms of their airport and their expansion and their desires. And Ann and I have also been up to Cheyenne. So the thing is, when you're planning regionally, and since we own half the airport with Loveland, I think what we're going to have to do is sit down with regional people and leaders and think about what's best for the region and what fits in each, airport in terms of aviation businesses, aviation travel, and ground transit to your air travel. And those will be, we're having a governance model study. We're getting close to agreeing on a new governance model. And I'm thinking, and so many others are, I haven't met with anybody who isn't thinking this way, of making an airport authority. That's a standalone entity that is run by a professional, not professional, I mean, still a board and a commission, but airport sort of experts or people who are aviators or, these sorts of things. When you have two cities do it, no offense to my fellow electeds, I'm not an airportologist, right? Like, do we need to widen the one way? I don't know.
Right. How would you know?
Yeah, and we rotate in so quickly. So to make that more professionalized, and right now, if there's something, the airport has to go through not one council, but two.
And then if either one changes the rules at all, you have to go back to the other one.
You have to, it's like the House and the Senate, you have to agree on the same version.
Yes.
And so that happens quicker in a legislative body than it does in two councils. So those things were really a good fit for FNL. It was born the same year I was, 1964. I have a soft spot in my heart for FNL. And it's time for it to be all grown up.
Yeah.
So happy to try to marshal in a new age over there with some different thinking.
Yeah.
Fascinating.
I'm equally curious about education at the airport. So Ames Community College has moved their pilot training program from the Greeley Airport to FNL. They've also now purchased a second hangar where they're planning to do airplane technician training. So suddenly we're training the future workforce around at least airplanes right there at FNL. My question is, well, what other training programs can we bring to again leverage an active runway that has a tremendous amount of growth opportunity, and we take over the model that CSU has shown is a tremendous economic driver. You bring a whole bunch of kids in, you train them up, have them spend all their money here, and then you send them off to their next opportunity. Maybe FNL should be that hub for us relative to training our future workforce when it comes to air service. That to me is super interesting. Yeah, exactly. Drones. I mean, you name it.
Yeah, I went to a private sector conference in Florida in May, which was they asked me to speak. Oh, okay. But it was called Co-Motion. It's something we don't usually attend. It's not government, as stepping out. And I said, no, I want to go to that because I am the chair of FNL right now of the commission. But and I went down there, and it was so energizing. You can't even believe it. Just the electric helicopter model, the vertical takeoff, the hovering capabilities, all this cool stuff. And I was like, what if we became the business education hub training center, and with matching up with our innovation entrepreneurial spirits, harnessing our D1 university, Colorado State University, right there to really take it to the next level.
Yeah.
It makes me so excited.
Yeah.
The aeronautical workforce training, and that could lead into things like unmanned aircraft training, utilizing this runway.
Yeah.
You look at the future of that with drones, unmanned.
Yeah.
Well, electric helicopters, that are quick hop, not like long, but like a vertical. And they started calling them, instead of airports, they're calling them vertports. I was like, FNL, the new vertport. And everybody's like, okay, slow down. But, what about, so what I'm saying, let's plan the airport area and not think of it as an airport, but think of it as the whole environment for tomorrow, instead of building something for yesterday.
Yes, yeah.
Yeah.
And changing that conversation away from, in 1994, I flew out of FNL
To Burbank on Wednesday morning.
No, I went to Washington, D.C.,
Oh,
but we
okay.
stopped in Denver, right? I mean, so it was a flight that started there, went to Denver, and went to D.C. That was lovely. That was great, but that's not going to be the future of this airport. And so for us to spend time and energy and money around, well, we have to replicate what happened in 1994 is folly in my mind and isn't taking advantage of, again, entrepreneurial spirit, a location that is perfectly suited for where it's at, and thinking differently about this resource that we have in our backyard.
Well, fascinating too. And also thinking differently about what is a decision that could be made that could make all future decisions easier, quicker, more efficient.
And it's the governance model.
The governance model.
It's exactly the conversation that Jeni's leading and leaning into. And it's we have to make it easier for decisions to be made.
Yeah, it's essentially Fort Collins and Loveland saying, let's both agree on this. There will be a governance model here, and we aren't experts on widening the runway or any of these other questions, topics, etc. So let's trust people who are and put a governance model in place.
And the other bonus, so right now, if there were a financial deficit, the cities get to take the total, split it, and write a check to make it up. If you create a governance model where it's no longer the cities owning the property, it's the authority owning the property, that also...
Actually, I hate to tell you, but by Colorado law, we still, actually FAA, we're still the sponsoring cities. And that's not dumb on the FAA's part to say, we still want this packed by the full faith and credit of the taxpayers. I mean, if I were them, I would do that. But I also, so you're correct. It'll be self-sustaining is the point.
Yes. And able to leverage new funding pathways that are challenging for two individual partners to leverage right now.
100%. And if a disaster befell or something, the cities still have the ultimate fiduciary responsibility. That doesn't bother me a bit. I feel like that's the right thing to do. But yeah, correct. Just to be clear, like
exciting. Well, this is
our lawyer told us that. I love that. our airport lawyer. He's like, actually,
well, this is exciting. Let's say hypothetically that me, maybe others too, are excited about a possibility of Palm Springs, Scottsdale, maybe
JSX
further markets.
Model. I'm all in.
The JSX model,
for sure.
Do either of you have any comment, thoughts, insight on that coming our way in the future? We know we've all read about the virtual, the tower, and is that something that's doable? And it doesn't seem like we had.
Set aside the tower conversation because that thing is still just fraught with blah. And again, whether it's owned by authority or owned by the two cities, we'll get that figured out with the FAA. I mean, the tower thing is going to get checked off the list. I think the bigger question is, are we willing, under our current design, are we willing as a community to write some pretty big checks to guarantee service to these locations that we talk about? The model right now in airports and in air service is, if you're Vail or if you're Aspen and you want a flight that goes from Denver to Aspen and Aspen to Denver, Aspen is going to actually write a check to United in the millions of dollars to guarantee that happens. So they're basically pre-buying the seats. Oh yeah, they're pre-buying the seats. And then if they fill the seats by selling them naturally on the market, the check amount can come down. But nonetheless, communities that are having dedicated service are writing checks in order to have that service if they are not international hubs. And the question is, who's got the checkbook here in Northern Colorado? I don't think any of us can turn around and write $1 million check. Now, our consultants continue to say, well, there's matching money, so you don't actually have to come up with the full $1 million. You just have to come up with $200,000. Again, I think it's this interesting conversation that we have to have as a larger community to decide, One is that commuter service highly important. And if we do all agree that it is, then we do have to figure out the funding source. And once we figure out the funding source, we also then have to figure out how we keep those planes full so that funding source is as little as possible.
Well, it sounds like
Yeah.
there's how do you keep them full is maybe a tough question, but in any event, United or whoever the airline carrier is, they're requiring a check, and that's fascinating. And let's just say Scottsdale. Let's use Scottsdale as an example.
Sure.
So United,
and it's a good
United
one.
would,
It's a
or
good
Southwest, they would say, does Scottsdale need to write a check? Does Fort Collins need to write a check? They both need to write a check.
Yeah,
kind of interesting because I'm thinking if I'm Scottsdale, I'm like, yeah, we're good. Like we've got a lot of people.
We're
here.
okay. Yeah, we're okay. Well, and then again, back to Greeley, they're having very, very aggressive plans for commercial, and they have a lot of space and they have a lot of parking. So our community's grown up underneath that airport. Then you look at other airports around the state that are being sued by the neighbors and those sorts of things. So it's really going to be a big, fascinating puzzle to see how we get where we want to go, right? We had a consultant say, you could be the Midway to Chicago. Well, Midway is to Chicago, FNL could be to Denver. I was like, I don't believe you because I don't think that area right there
has the capacity.
I just don't see it happening, especially with the proximity of homes. Greeley, I could see a JetBlue. I could see Frontier running out of Greeley. It's 40 miles to DIA from there, right? Now, United did ask me, like, they want to do some diversions at FNL during weather. Mm-hmm. Great. We run tons of rescue, of emergency operations out of FNL for fire, all those health MCRs right there. So we just really have to do a lot of strategic planning. And I would never leave our regional partners out of it because I was like, why wouldn't we complement each other instead of compete? And they were like, can you say that again? Having two airports trying to be the Midway, that's not going to work. And if it's millions of dollars, I don't see Fort Collins with our housing crunch, with our affordability, with some of the concerns we have, attracting people who are sort of in the bottom third of the earning or being wage earning area, saying, "Hey, yeah, sure, I'm going to pay an extra $100 a year.
Please take my sales tax dollars
so that I can get to Scottsdale easier." I'm pretty sure. I think I would say no to that. But to your point, what are we going to do about air transportation in the future? Great question.
And I want to go back to a statement that Jeni made early on in our conversation today, which is we need to stop programming for the past. We need to start planning for the future. And I think technology and air travel is absolutely all about the future. So yes, a 737 is very noisy landing in that airport right now. But all indications are the next generation of technology that comes along with airplanes is quieter, is kinder to our environment, is faster. And so then, right, if you start to think about that future technology and you lean in on the parts of the airplane industry that are going to change the fastest,
super cool.
Then there's some magic there.
Then you're going to Scottsdale.
Yeah. You're going to Scottsdale on an electric plane that is silent, right? I mean,
with five passengers.
Yeah.
Right? Have you looked into those? Oh my gosh. My brother-in-law's totally into these. He's like, Jeni, they're all electric and they carry 6 people. Yeah. They're like electric people movers.
Yeah.
I mean,
and quiet.
Yeah.
And these are planes?
They're planes. Yeah.
Wow.
Again, there's
a lot of
future stuff that gets really exciting. And we just have to get over our tendency of we only look to the past to set our future policy. We really do have to divorce ourselves. We have to be the classic goldfish. We only have 10 seconds of memory in order to then really look ahead.
I asked him at that co-motion conference. I was like, so on Slow Airport, if we get another runway, we needed to widen this one for several reasons, so we're widening it. But if we get another runway and we do this, and I go, are we kind of building the airport of the past? And they go, yes. And I said, since we have this opportunity and basically a blank slate out there, let's be as smart as our foreparents were for us. The things that when they buried the underground lines, when they did this, when they put in dark fiber, when they did that to make our connections easier, right? And the challenge is, can we be that smart?
Yeah.
For our kids and grandkids. Wouldn't that be exciting?
Can we have that much foresight? I mean, I'm coming away from this conversation thinking that we're going to have an aeronautical workforce hub of the future, and I might be flying to Scottsdale, Palm Springs on a 5-person Electron plane. So this is, my horizons have been broadened. I hope other people's will be as well when they listen to this. This went in a direction this is so much deeper. So thank you for that. I couldn't have you leave here, Jeni, without talking about water, and we'll all have this conversation. But one thing that we talked about in our last conversation that, people were kind of following up with me on and just asking more questions on was, we have 6 main kind of large water districts in Fort Collins, right?
Mm-hmm.
The big ones, City
There's
of Fort
some small
Collins.
ones, yeah.
City of Fort Collins is a big one. The Fort Collins Loveland Water District is a big one. Those are like the 2 biggest ones. And we talked about the City of Fort Collins and how we have, the Poudre shares, and we have some, CBT shares, Colorado, Big Thompson River shares. And, those are, that could be, subject to some things in the future that could restrict the availability. We also talked about how Fort Collins Loveland Water District has a higher percentage of their water share portfolio in those CBT shares.
I think it's almost 100%. I could be wrong off that by a bit.
But it's a lot.
It's a lot, yeah.
And that could really be, just kind of subject to being curtailed and more in time. And one thing that I thought a question for you is, if you or someone you love is purchasing a property that they plan to hand down generation after generation, is there any water district that you would say, really do your research? Because we talked about those, and I don't want to cause any controversy here, but I think just people knowing these things, when they're making, for most people, a lot of people at least, the biggest financial decision of their entire life, but whether it's, one of the 4 smaller ones or Fort Collins Loveland Water District, is there any reason for concern? And is there any reason to at least really do your research and look into it before you make a purchase?
Oh, thanks for that question. I said, well, no one chooses their house by water district except for me.
Yes. You did say that.
I did. I know.
I was listening back to it,
it's sort of a side hustle joke.
Yeah. But as you said that, though, I remember thinking, yet.
Yeah.
No one
makes
this decision based on the water district yet.
So,
but maybe in the future.
I think I will, and I don't want to speak for the water districts. I know most about Fort Collins utilities, So I would say within the city of Fort Collins, you're going to have your water. Or if there's I would like to have sort of an MOU with the water districts, since we do have different water rights. And if one of them is curtailed, I think it's a fundamentally horrible thing for a single municipality to have one person under curtailment and the other person washing their car and sprinkling the lawn. For domestic municipal harmony, I would like to shore up our sharing water agreements, right, within our city boundaries, right? I do really want to push that, because that just seems like the right thing to do. If we're sitting on 50% CBT and 50% Poudre shares, we should share, right? This should be a shared thing. What I would caution people to investigate and realtors to understand, and unbelievably it still sometimes happens, is developments somehow are being allowed to be built without securing the water rights first. Or they don't have to get the water rights, but they have to have the access to the use of it. So they don't have to personally own the water rights. So that happened in Severance, right? And so that development came to a halt. So I would say to realtors and purchasers, I don't think there's that many sort of, quote, bad deals out there, but I can't guarantee that at some point one of those might have slipped through the crack. Counties and cities are being a lot more When I was at the Capitol, I ran a bill that said in a local government, and that means county or city, master plan, I wanted to put, you must consider water. World War III broke out. I was like, oh, okay. How about shall consider water? No. How about may consider water? And that bill still took 3 years to pass. And in that, I said, well, if I'm just saying you may consider water, I don't really think that's a law. So, I mean, they already may consider it now. And
Right.
I was working with the American Planning Association. They're like, yeah, you're right. I go, so what actually makes this a law? I go, I know, I have an idea that makes it a law. You put in a single FTE, full-time equivalency, at the Department of Local Government and Local Affairs, DOLA, for a water expert to assist local governments in implementing water into their master plan. Third time's a charm. So I'm just telling you the struggle we've had getting local governments to agree that when they do a master plan, I would change it now and say must consider water, because we have local governments who still don't consider water, and they're going to let a building development go without saying, hey, you have to get the water rights. That's not as common as it used to be, but that's what I'd be careful of.
Yeah. And in the water space, the thing that I find fascinating right now is this conversation around how do we keep water that is here in northern Colorado in northern Colorado. And, our friends on the Western Slope have done a masterful job in protecting the Colorado River and making that right. I mean, it's on posters and people stand in it naked, and that they're protecting that river. And that's part of this conversation of how much of that should be allowed to come over to the eastern slope versus the western slope. I think the next phase, and we've got a lot of leaders that are asking this question, is how do we now protect the Poudre River as well as its other tributaries? And again, how do we keep our water here in order to make sure that we don't have communities that approve a master housing plan and suddenly only 5 of the houses have water and 10 of them don't? I think that's going to be a real challenge for us. It really is thinking differently about this resource and protecting it for not only my use, but for my neighbor's use. And I'm not sure we're ready for it as a society, but it's a really important conversation for us regionally in order to keep ourselves viable moving forward.
Yeah. I mean, I think it's just a good question for people to ask. I mean, certainly with new developments now, with what happened in Severance, that issue is shocking to me that it happened. But people asking, okay, what water district is providing water? And if they want to go even deeper, what's their portfolio of water
Those
rights?
aren't bad things to ask.
And then just know, especially this is something they plan to have for many, many years, maybe even generations. I know you mentioned in our last conversation too that there was some work to try to increase water storage by 8,000 acre feet by rebuilding the Halligan Dam, if I'm saying that right. And is that happening? Is that progressing? Is there still action being taken to kind of just improve the water storage? I think that's specifically for the city of Fort Collins.
That's Fort Collins Utilities. Yeah.
Mhm.
So everyone has to keep in mind, because we talk about it as if it's the whole city.
Right.
So it's really important. And I always try to remind people when we talk about that. So it's the ratepayers in the Fort Collins Utilities District that would be, seeing a rate increase partially to fund that new dam, replacing the old one for an additional 8,000 acre feet. Fort Collins does not have the final permitting on that. They've decided to go through a 1041 process with the county first.
Okay. What's that?
That's the local government's response to they can set up their 1041 regulations how they want, but in general, it's for something that goes through their jurisdiction but doesn't necessarily benefit their jurisdiction. So an example would be if the state highway comes through Fort Collins, we would probably put some extra environmental wraparounds around that. The county has 1041 regulations because this would impact county property without necessarily benefiting it, although we're in the county. Those sorts of things. So there'd be a county approval. I questioned the city on that. I said, why would you go for a county approval when you don't have the 404 permit, which is the final sign-off permit? The reason why I don't say that's federal is because the Supreme Court just acted and tossed that back to the states. This is all very a fluid environment. And then the legislature set up the regulations, set up the law last year conferring the power of the state to do it. The state is now in rulemaking. Just stop me when you get tired. In rulemaking for this 404 permitting. So
no insurmountable challenges though on the road.
So that's a big
it.
one. So, but this is all to say that Fort Collins is in the middle of permitting. I think they're still under the federal regulations because of that's when they started. So I said, well, why are you going for the county one before you have the federal one? Because if you don't get the federal one, you don't need the county one. And they have a strategy. I can't dig that deep into the strategy of the city unless it comes to council. That's just our form of government.
Okay.
So yes, it's their intention to continue with that. I will say personally, and they don't like it when I say this, but I wouldn't mind having some more looking at that in terms of a viability of that, given that Northern Water has its 404 permit, it has its drinking water, it has all the permits. There'll still be legal challenges. They just beat one a couple months ago. Would it make sense to collaborate and get one dam instead of two? I know that when you start a project as big as Halligan, you get pretty far down the road and it feels really hard to change course. I'm just asking them to keep an open mind to see if that might not be one, better for the environment because we have one dam instead of two, and two, better for the ratepayer. Those are just actually personal questions.
And a little bit of additional background for your listeners, Greg. The Halligan permit, so that project is 20 years in the making. And so we've been at this for 20 years and still don't have either a local, a state, or a federal permit for that. Same thing for this Northern project. It has been in the making for 20 years. But
it's further along now.
It is further along. It finally does they've got their final thing. But nonetheless, 20 years in the making in order to dig a hole and put up a wall and pour water in there.
Well, those are the basics.
Well, they are, right?
But I think what you're saying is, doesn't it make sense to collaborate and
I think
get benefit of that versus trying to go through.
And Jenny's asking the right question, right? Do you continue on this path of two really big projects that each have their own merits, or do you at a certain point say, you know what, let's throw in together and let's make it better for everyone? And in this water space, I do think this collaboration and consolidation is our future in Northern Colorado. We're starting to see water districts start to partner and talk to each other in different ways than we have in the past. I think the same is true with our reservoirs. So, we've got an example where a community to the south of us is not going to build a new treatment plant. Instead, they're going to buy water from a nearby district. That's in many ways unheard of in the past. We've been very much, nope, this is my silo and I have the walls around it and no one shall come in, no one shall go out. This is my kingdom. And as we start to see more of this, again, cooperation, consolidation, looking at ways that it makes sense to come together, I think in this water space, it serves all of us so much better with that kind of an attitude and with that opportunity.
It's going to be necessary.
Yeah.
Very complex.
Yeah.
People need to be very patient.
Yeah.
You will need to run for mayor again, I think.
Agreed.
For the third term.
Start the petition now, please.
So one issue I want to bring just a little bit more awareness to is ballot issue 1A, transportation. I don't know that enough people were talking about this, thinking about this, educated about this prior to filling out their ballots recently here. So, one of you, both of you, let's talk about what that is. And I know it didn't pass this time around, but let's talk about what that is and then what the next steps are.
Yeah, I'll take that one on to start. So Larimer County has been doing some great analysis over really the last 4 years to say, how are we funding roadway improvements outside of the city limits of our communities? And do we have enough dollars in order to meet the demands and the needs of our larger county? And we've quickly come to the point of understanding that despite increases in property taxes and some of the valuation impacts that we've had over the last couple of years, there simply aren't dollars in that county budget to be able to spend on infrastructure, and specifically road infrastructure.
Roadways, bridges,
exactly.
intersection signage.
You've got it. Yes, exactly. So we, chambers here in Northern Colorado, Loveland and Fort Collins, worked alongside staff to really understand, number one, what's the depth of that challenge facing the county, but then number two, testing the concept with voters to see if voters would be willing to levy a new sales tax in order to build a pot of money that we could end up spending on all of those things you mentioned, Greg. And the polling was actually very positive. We were sitting at about a 62% in favor of a 0.15% sales tax, which would end up being 15 cents on a $100 purchase, passed countywide. So we all looked at each other and said, this feels like gold. Let's go. So commissioners referred the issue to the ballot. We as chambers stood up and said, we think this is the right idea. We're going to tell all of our members about it, and we'll also set up a campaign to talk directly to voters about it. Again, with the polling data, it felt like we didn't need to do a lot of push. We just needed to really remind the people that we knew supported it to show up and vote their ballot. I think we've all learned that this was a very interesting moment at the ballot box where we had a strong voice return to the ballot box that was maybe a little quieter the last couple of years, that wasn't as interested in growing government, which is what a new sales tax does. It creates some more government. So while we didn't spend a lot of time talking to voters that we thought would be opposed, they showed up. They showed up big at the box. So unfortunately, we were unsuccessful in passing the ballot issue. We are already starting to talk about, we need to deep dive on what happened there. What did voters think when they went to the ballot box? Why did they vote against it?
Which precincts and areas voted against?
Exactly. Really understanding where that vote came from across the areas. So we're already talking about what does that deep dive look like. As I talk with my friends at the county, we agree it's the right answer. It's a small amount to prove out that the county can be good at this, because it had a sunset. It was for a 10-year window. So if we can get a few dollars flowing, we can prove that the county can be a good partner, can deliver on their promise. Then we can come back and we'll talk about bigger and longer and all of the things. So again, my friends at the county and I believe we're on the right track. This is the right starting solution. We need to understand what happened at the box. We need to spend really the next 6 to 8 months educating our community about, but for this, we get this, and then turn around and refer it probably in August or September back to the ballot for 2025, and then have a really strong game plan of talking directly to voters after we've already talked to them for 6 months as they get ready to vote that ballot. So, yeah.
So looking towards 2025.
Yeah.
And getting it passed. I mean, these are the roads that are, that our kids drive on, that our family members are on,
that
the
connect
signs,
our
the bridges, that connect our communities. So, and also I think in my mind, it is a city issue too. I know it's a county voting issue, but when people are here, they don't know if they're on I'm in the county now, I'm in the city now. They're just judging Fort Collins, and it's interesting getting feedback from people who are newer here from out of state, who are making a real estate purchase and making this their new home.
Yeah.
So the city, but this was not a sales tax increase, but it was a re-up of our renewal of our streets tax. sailed through.
Without hesitation, without a campaign, with
Nothing.
very, very little fanfare. Yeah.
And it wasn't an increase, it was a renewal, but the voters were very interesting this year because
they were wacky.
Last year, when the city referred a quarter cent for parks and recreation and transit climate sales tax.
Brand new.
And a property tax associated with affordable housing. The property tax failed and the sales tax passed. Now, this is a municipal election, not countywide. Okay, but brand new, quarter cent. So half the quarter cent going to transit and climate and the other half going to park asset management. Okay. This year on the ballot, there was a tiny 0.15% for county.
Tiny.
And a 4 mil increase on property tax for schools that's Poudre School District wide, which passed. So the property tax passed.
Yeah.
And the sales tax failed.
Yeah. Voters
Now,
are wacky.
Different voters. We've got PSD, we've got city, we've got county in there. But you go, huh. Okay.
What are they trying to tell us?
I agree with Ann. Let's double check. So it is an interesting thing to think of what people are saying.
Yeah.
You know, I would submit, I think people are busy, they're distracted, and a lot of times they just don't know if they go to a site to research the issues, does that site have a bias one way or the other? I think it'll be just interesting to see what we can do going forward so that people really know what they're voting for. I mean, do you remember when the whether it's called the cannabis or the marijuana thing was on the ballot? I think it was like 4 paragraphs put together in one block on there. And by the time I got done reading it, I had no idea, truly no idea. I had to do much more research to understand what does this mean? What am I voting for or against?
When I was state rep, every year I would have a ballot conversation, usually at Horse and Dragon, and very well attended. And I'm totally it's not for me to none of it. I don't sway people. I don't anything. And I'm not the expert in the room either, although I do know a lot of the ins and outs of it if people ask me a direct question. But really, we get in groups sort of like the civic conversations, and we talk over the ballot together. It's like the Blue Book talk. So this year, mayor's funny because it's a little more public than state rep, and it's a little bit more, I'm super affiliated with the city. So
she didn't get to do it this year.
I felt a little bit awkward of having one because it looks like, the mayor's going to tell you how to vote, which is absolutely not what I do because I trust the voters. And so I ended up having 2 in my home that were basically friends and I call them my no-knock friends. Like everyone invited, like, you just walk in my door. Don't ring my doorbell. So I had sort of the no-knock group over. But it was so valuable to have those civic conversations. So I would encourage next time either you do it with your friends and neighbors, or, I'll have more of them, but it doesn't always have to be me. It can be anybody or the chamber or just, and, it's not to tell. I changed my vote on 2 state ballot initiatives based on my neighborhood meeting, right? Just talking through the issues and people's different viewpoints going, well, if you outlaw the hunting on it was so fascinating. People came away with vastly different votes from each other, not a single crossword. A lot of good education. One person said, I'm really embarrassed because I don't know much about it here. Another neighbor, very first question was, what's a fiscal note? I said, great. No question is inappropriate. Yeah. I said, oh, see, okay. Well, so I can ask. I'm like, yeah, of course you can. So those forums, even if you host it yourself and collectively you and your neighbors will come away with it's fun.
And certainly this year, with the longest ballot we have ever seen as a state since 1914.
Was it?
Yeah. That's wild in and of itself. So you have this, 17 issues to consider from a state perspective. You then have 1 county issue. You have 4 city issues. You have a PSD issue. And that's just for the people in Fort Collins to vote on. Loveland had another 4 4 items on the ballot. Wellington had 2. I mean, it was a lot of homework that we were asking voters to do. The other interesting thing is I was very anxious about drop-off of voters, that voters would either, one, say they voted because they want to look smart amongst their friends, but they actually picked up their ballot, looked at it, and said, there's no way, right? They're picking it up on Monday at midnight and thinking, oh, I'll just pound this out and drop it off tomorrow. And they're like, yeah, I'll wear my sticker, but I didn't vote. Right? I figured we'd have a lot of that. I'm curious to see if that played out. I also think we had a lot of voters that maybe marked the very first box on their ballot, put it back into the envelope and returned it. And we did see that. If you compared your presidential votes to all the way down to your city and your county votes, there was a definite drop off in the number of people that made their way all the way through the ballot. So you throw all of that into the box and say, oh, what do we have to learn from this? And that's where, again, for this county tax and specifically for transportation, I think we've got a great opportunity in an off general election ballot where it really is people that understand the issue, are going to stand up for the issue, and are going to vote yes. So we've got some opportunity in front of us.
Yeah, and then how do we connect that to what they care about in a simple way that doesn't take too many mental calories? I think so many people were looking at the ballot and they're like, oh, property tax increase. Oh, well, yeah, I think that the kids need AC in their classroom. Makes sense. Yep. And then they just got to that, and for whatever reason this time it just didn't land despite all the hard work and despite I think the fact that it is so important. So important. So we're gonna get the word out next time. As we wrap up, any other
I'll
issues?
be coming back.
Okay.
We'll have a deep dive on transportation, Greg. We'll make this
We'll make it happen.
I would love that. And I'll bring some of my transportation friends along. That'd be awesome.
Okay. We will make that happen.
Yeah.
Any other initiatives that are important to you both as we're just wrapping up here, whether they're going to be on a ballot or not, that you think people should know about, should learn more about, should educate themselves about?
Well, one theme that Jeni and I spend a lot of time talking about is how do we continue to create intentional moments for us to have really thoughtful conversations as a community? How can we get more civil in the way that we interact with each other? How can we battle some of the online meanness? How can we really set a positive vision for our community and begin to talk about things in that positive way versus the negative beat each other up way? And so I think we both continue to really focus on advocating for, creating, celebrating when we have those moments. And so I would love to invite your listeners to join us in this maybe Pollyannish space, but join us in the building community for each other, with each other kind of mentality. Because if we each bring that to a table that we're at, suddenly we're not alone in being that voice and being that visionary to say, we can do this together and we can have lots of different opinions, but we can still be kind to each other. So that's a centerpiece of a lot of our conversations.
Absolutely. It's a theme, and there's something concrete coming up. So I'll give a little plug for State of the City. It's not till February this year, but we're hoping to get a whole bunch of people at State of the City, which is when the city manager and I talk about the State of the City. At the State of the City, we decide today we're going to be drawing the names for our upcoming Civic Assembly.
Ooh, very exciting.
So the Civic Assembly is, you can look it up, anybody can, but we've got some outside consultants to help us, and it's a quite as the city, we do nothing halfway. We have a lot of process, but it is a process by which you engage a random sample of the community, offer them to form a civic assembly, and they vet out it works best with one issue. And in this case, we've selected the sort of gnarly issue of how do we share the land at Hughes? What is going to happen at Hughes, right? Some people want a bike park, some people want a bird sanctuary, some people want all natural areas, so on and so forth. And the Civic Assembly will be the civic body that will be the ones listening to and vetting the ideas and making a final recommendation to council. So we're looking for all participants. I believe everyone, a voting age in the city, will receive a postcard inviting them to opt in. And then we will choose the civic assembly at our city, state of the city. So if you like to, and then it ends. It's not a continuing. You will be paid some because we don't want to block anyone out. So look for that. I would say one. And then while I have this microphone in front of me, can I take 1 second to say, hey, Fort Collins, slow down. We have a new traffic enforcement. We're serious. We monitored first with the data before we implemented this, the ability of red light cameras to also measure and ticket for speed. But we had 16,000 cars go through Shields and Prospect at more than 10 miles an hour or more over the limit. That's 500 a day.
That's insane.
So once you're over 10 miles an hour or over and are involved in an accident, the chances of that being a serious injury or death go up exponentially. We're serious about asking to slow down. We don't want to give tickets. We're asking for a behavior change. So slow down, please.
Be nice to each other.
You be kind. Or as the police say, slow the FOCO down.
Oh, I love that. That's great. In the state of the city, that's in February. And that is the date and time to be determined yet, or is that?
I think we said it. I think it's the second Monday in February.
I'll put it in the show notes for this too, so when people are listening or watching, they can see it.
Right.
And is that something you RSVP for, or do you show up?
Well, it's not like we check at the door.
Sure. Yeah, I would imagine.
We like to get a rough count, but we plan for about
There'll be a link. There'll be a link on the city website.
We welcome everyone.
We'll guide people there. And I appreciate the note for people slowing down out there. I think that's great. That's something we're seeing. This is a densifying market. And slow down out there, and let's all work together. Thank you two for being here. I think we got into some really fun topics today. People that want to learn more and invest more in this community. I think everybody, the people I know here, they really have this in common. They love Fort Collins, and we can focus more on that than any differences and work together. So thanks again for your time. And this is a wrap, but we'll be in touch soon.